I've seen arrogance. I've seen stupidity. I've seen the kind of puffed-up bravado that makes grown adults forget how laws work. But the morning that police chief strutted into my courtroom like he owned the marble tiles under his feet, that was a new brand of delusion even for me. I walked in robe-sharp, coffee hotter than most people's moral compass, and there he was, Chief Raymond Kessler. Broad shoulders, shiny badges, and an ego so oversized it deserved its own zip code. He stood there with his hands clasped behind his back like he was reviewing his troops, not appearing in front of a judge. My courtroom, my kingdom, my rules. The bailiff announced the case, but the chief barely turned his head. He was busy inspecting a scuff mark on the railing, probably wondering who had the audacity to let imperfection exist in his presence. I watched him for a moment. I like to give people just enough rope to show me whether they plan to climb or hang themselves. He didn't disappoint. I sat down, looked straight at him, and before I could open my mouth, he gave me a smile so smug it could have been classified as a controlled substance. Your Honor, he said, I'll try to make this quick. I run this town, and I'm sure we can straighten this out without wasting your valuable time. Oh, sweetheart. Wrong judge, wrong century, wrong universe. I leaned back, folded my hands, and let the silence stretch. Some judges ramble. Some get flustered. Me, I weaponize quiet the way some people wield artillery. Sure enough, it only took 3 seconds before he started shifting like a kid caught sneaking cookies. I see, I finally said. You run the town. Fascinating. And here I thought we were still operating under a democratic system. Silly me. He blinked, thrown off just enough to amuse me. The complaint before me wasn't trivial. It involved misuse of authority, intimidation of business owners, and a laundry list of little abuses that add up to one big ugly truth. This man believed the badge wasn't a symbol, it was a crown. And he wore it like he believed he was ordained by some divine idiot. Chief Kessler, I said, you're accused of threatening a local contractor with shutting down his business unless he provided free labor on your personal property. Is that correct? He shrugged. I call it community partnership. I call it extortion, but I wanted to savor watching him dig his own grave, so I let him talk. And when the contractor refused, I continued, you allegedly dispatched officers to cite him for violations that, according to the inspection records, did not exist. He smirked. Sometimes people need a little motivation. I raised an eyebrow. Motivation. Like a gun to the head is a suggestion. He chuckled, and if arrogance had a sound, that was it. Judge, with all due respect, I cut him off. Don't with all due respect me. When people say that, it means the next thing out of their mouth is disrespect dressed in a tuxedo. His jaw tightened. He didn't like being interrupted. Men with unchecked power rarely do. But this wasn't his precinct, and I wasn't one of his officers. I don't take orders, and I certainly don't take attitude. The first witness, the contractor, shuffled nervously to the stand. The man's hands shook, and he avoided looking at the chief altogether. That told me plenty before he even opened his mouth. When intimidation is done well, it leaves fingerprints on the psyche. And this man looked like he'd been squeezed through the ringer. Sir, I asked, is it true the chief threatened to shut down your business? The contractor swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. He told me that if I didn't build the gazebo for him, he'd make sure I wouldn't pass another inspection. Ever. Did he say this directly? Yes. Any witnesses? My son. He heard everything. The chief let out a laugh that echoed across the room. Judge, this man's a coward. He's scared of his own shadow. He'll say anything to make himself look like a victim. I turned toward the chief so slowly you would have thought I had all the time in the world. Chief, unless shadows hold badges and issue threats, I doubt the intimidation came from himself. That got a few muffled chuckles from the gallery. He glared around, suddenly realizing the room wasn't filled with his subordinates. Then came a moment I've witnessed too many times, the unraveling. It always starts with denial, then defensiveness, then fury. And this man, he was about to march himself through all three with the determination of someone who's never been told no. The contractor's son testified next. Young man, maybe 18, voice quiet but steady. He described the chief's exact words, times, I run this town. If your father doesn't cooperate, he won't operate. Asterisk. I looked at the chief. Did you say that? He shrugged again, his favorite gesture. Maybe. I say a lot of things. People exaggerate. No, I said, what you do is weaponize your authority and expect people to bow. He bristled. Judge Judy, you're making this much bigger than... I snapped my fingers sharply. Stop talking. The courtroom froze. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim in obedience. You walk into my courtroom and announce you run the town, I said. But let me enlighten you, you don't run this courtroom. And right now you barely run your own mouth without tripping over your ego. His ears flushed red. He opened his lips to speak, then shut them again. Smart, or at least smarter than a moment earlier. But the prosecution wasn't done, not by a long shot. A small business owner came forward next, then another. Same pattern: threats, bogus citations, coercion disguised as community safety. When corruption spreads, it leaves a trail of bruised dignity and empty wallets. By the fourth witness, even the chief started to fidget. Good. Guilt has a way of making itself physically uncomfortable. When I asked him whether he wanted to respond, he leaned forward and gave me a grin people usually reserve for poker tables. Judge, nothing happens in this town unless I say so. That's just how things work. Everyone knows it. These people, they should be grateful. Grateful? The word hung in the air like a bad smell. So I said, slowly your defense is that you rule by fear and they should thank you for it. He didn't even flinch. Exactly. And that's when I knew we were heading somewhere beautiful, somewhere with cold metal, a booking number, and a very surprised police chief. But I wasn't at the climax yet. No, I was just winding the spring. I leaned in. Chief Kessler, your badge doesn't make you a king. It makes you accountable. And right now, you're about to learn what accountability feels like. He snorted. Please, no judge has ever had the guts to... And then he said it. The sentence that detonated whatever fragile bridge still existed between us. I run this town, Judge. Not you. I smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, the kind of smile I reserve for people who have just signed their own arrest warrant with a flourish. I've heard a lot of stupid things in my life, but I run this town, not you inside a courtroom to a sitting judge while under accusation of abusing power. That's not just stupid, that's suicidal. The gallery went dead silent. Even the air paused to see what I'd do with that. I tapped my pen against the bench. Once. You run this town. He nodded, smug. That's right. Wonderful, I said. Then you'll have no trouble running it from a much smaller room if it turns out you've been breaking the law. He scoffed like I just told him Santa wasn't real. Judge, with all due respect, there you go again, I cut in. If you say with all due respect one more time, I'm holding you in contempt just for being predictable. A faint laugh rippled through the room. He swung his head toward the gallery, giving them a look that would have shut them up if this were his precinct. It wasn't. I turned to the prosecutor. Do we have documentation or are we still playing the he said he bluffed game? The prosecutor was a young woman, sharp eyes, file already open, the kind that did her homework and didn't flinch. I like those. They make my job easier. Yes, Your Honor, she said. We have inspection records, text messages, and audio recordings provided by the witnesses. Audio, I repeated. Of the chief? Yes. Of him saying, what exactly? She glanced at the page. That he can shut down any business he wants, that he runs the town, and that judges don't tell him what to do. Well, when people confess, I usually prefer it under oath, but I'll take whatever the universe gifts me. Play it, I said. The bailiff brought over the speaker, set it up. The chief leaned back like this was beneath him. It's always entertaining how the most guilty ones behave like they're sitting in on someone else's trial. The recording crackled, then steadied. I heard a man's nervous voice, that contractor, followed by a deep, confident tone dripping with entitlement. The chief, if you don't want problems, you help me out. I run this town. I decide who opens, who closes. Judge or no judge, no one overrules me here. I watched his face as his own words filled the courtroom. He didn't flinch. That's the thing about people like him. They believe their own propaganda so deeply that even hearing themselves doesn't trigger shame. There's nothing to hit. When the recording ended, I looked at him. That your voice, he stared back, could be altered. Good. We were moving into phase 2 delusion with a side of denial. I turned to the prosecutor. Chain of custody, clean, Your Honor. Pulled directly from the contractor's security system and verified by a forensic analyst. Report is in the file. I flipped through the report quickly. It checked out. I've read enough bogus paperwork in my life to recognize the real thing when I see it. I shifted my attention back to the chief, so either the contractor has an Academy Award-winning impersonator on payroll, or that's you. He crossed his arms. Even if it is, that doesn't prove anything. That's how law enforcement works. We apply pressure. I narrowed my eyes. Pressure is asking questions. Pressure is investigating. What you described is extortion and coercion. That's not law enforcement. That's organized crime with a pension plan. His jaw twitched. I've watched mobsters show more humility than this man. We're not done, I said. Call your next witness. The prosecution brought in a woman who owned a small cafe. She looked tired, like someone who'd been fighting a long, losing battle against something bigger than her. She talked about surprise inspections every week, minor infractions blown into major fines, customers scared off by squad cars parked outside. She tried to complain, and suddenly her health department ratings plummeted on paper only. The inspector never even showed up in person. Who told you to stop complaining? I asked. She swallowed. The chief, he said, I should remember who keeps the streets safe and who can make them very unsafe for me. I glanced at the chief. You say that? He smirked. I maintain order, Judge. That's all. No, I replied, you maintain control. There's a difference. One serves the public. The other serves your ego. He leaned forward. If I didn't keep people in line, this town would fall apart. I met his eyes. No, Chief. If you didn't keep people scared, you would fall apart. He stared at me, and for the first time I saw it a flicker. Not fear yet, just the realization that maybe, just maybe, this narrative he'd built around himself wasn't going to sell in here. Good. Welcome to reality. Chief, I said, how many officers report directly to you? 42, he replied. And how many of them are here today? I asked, glancing behind him where a row of uniformed officers sat. At least 24, he said, lifting his chin like that number impressed me. It doesn't, I said. Did you order them to attend? He hesitated. I suggested it. Suggested, I repeated, as in they understood it wasn't optional. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I looked past him at the officers. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked blank. And a few had the tight-lipped, watchful expression of people who'd been waiting a long time for someone to finally put a leash on their boss. I pointed at one of them. You, officer, stand up. He stiffened, then rose. Young, nervous, but there was a backbone in there. What's your name? I asked. Officer Daniels, Your Honor. Officer Daniels, did you feel encouraged to come here today or instructed? He looked at the chief, then back at me. That moment right there, that's where character lives. I didn't blink. Neither should he. Instructed, Your Honor, he said quietly. The chief whipped his head around. Daniels, stop, I snapped. You don't talk to him, you talk to me. And right now you've talked yourself into a hole. I turned back to Daniels. Has the chief ever directed you to target specific businesses or individuals without probable cause? He hesitated again, and I watched him war with himself. Loyalty versus integrity, fear versus truth. This is the crossroads where decent people either become complicit or courageous. Yes, Your Honor, he finally said. He has. The room exhaled like it hadn't been breathing. I nodded once. Thank you, officer. You may sit. The chief was fuming now. This is ridiculous. These are my people. They're turning on me because you're intimidating them. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Short, sharp, very much not friendly. Oh, that's rich, I said. The man who's built a career on intimidation suddenly doesn't like the taste of pressure. He slammed his palm against the table. I run this town. There it was again. His favorite line. Like if he repeated it enough, it would magically become a legal doctrine. I slammed my gavel once. No, you ran this town. Past tense. Right now, you're running out of time, out of credibility, and very quickly out of freedom. He stood up. You can't talk to me like that. I stared him down. I just did. He took a step forward, and the bailiff immediately moved between us. People like Kessler forget where the invisible electric fences are. They think they can cross any line, and the world will move to accommodate them. Not in my courtroom. Sit down, I said slowly. You take one more step toward this bench and we'll skip right past the legal foreplay and go straight to contempt. He glared, nostrils flaring, then finally sat the chair, scraping loudly. Good. Gravity still works. I shuffled the file in front of me. We had testimony. We had evidence. We had recordings. We had an officer willing to break the code of silence and say the truth out loud. All that was left was the part I do best: cut through the nonsense, peel off the bad-shaped armor, and expose the person beneath. Chief Kessler, I began, do you understand that abuses of power by law enforcement don't just harm individuals, they corrode trust in the system itself? He sneered. Spare me the lecture. Oh, I'm not lecturing you, I replied. You're a lost cause. I'm talking to everyone watching. Because bullies with badges don't just magically appear. They exist because people are too scared, too tired, or too cynical to challenge them. I let my gaze sweep the room. But that stops when someone says, no more. Today, that someone is me. I turned back to him. Last chance, Chief. Do you want to admit anything, show a shred of remorse, or are you married to this fantasy where you're the untouchable king of a one-horse town? He lifted his chin. I regret nothing. I did what needed to be done. These people are soft. You're soft. I keep order. That's what matters. You can't rehabilitate a man who worships his own reflection. Very well, I said. Then we proceed. And as I reached for the order that would change his life completely, I saw at the first real crack. His confidence wasn't a shield anymore. It was a mask slipping. We were finally approaching the fun part. When a man like Chief Kessler realizes he's losing control, it doesn't happen gracefully. It's not a gentle unraveling. It's a detonation, slow at first, then catastrophic. I watched it in real time. His fingers tapped against the table too fast. His jaw clenched hard enough to crack a tooth. His shoulders rose, breath shallow. It was the kind of panic a man feels when he finally understands the system he's been bending is no longer bending for him. Good. Let it sink in. Chief Kessler, I said, keeping my voice calm, not kind, just calm, because calm is far more threatening to bullies than yelling. We're going to hear testimony from one more witness. He scoffed. Who else? The janitor, the mailman, maybe the town dog. I ignored him, which irritated him more effectively than any insult I could have delivered. Bring in Sergeant Hale. That got him. His head snapped toward the doors so fast I thought he'd pull a tendon. The gallery straightened. Even the officers in attendance shifted like a wave had rolled through them. A woman walked in, late 30 seconds, steady eyes, posture like someone who'd held a line when others ran. She took the stand without hesitation, without glancing at the chief. That alone told me everything I needed to know. She'd made her choice before she stepped in. I nodded to her. Sergeant Hale, you requested to testify. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand doing so may affect your employment under the man sitting at that table. She looked at him once, short, sharp, decisive. My employment isn't worth my integrity. I smiled. Good answer. The chief leaned forward. Hale, you're making a mistake. She didn't acknowledge him. Perfect. I gestured. Go ahead, Sergeant. She folded her hands. Over the past 3 years, Chief Kessler has ordered officers, including myself, to issue citations without cause, intimidate business owners, and conduct compliance checks that were essentially threats. The chief slammed his palm on the table. Lies. I pointed a finger at him. Make one more outburst and I'll have you removed from this courtroom so fast your badge will get whiplash. He clamped his mouth shut. It wasn't obedience, it was self-preservation. Barely. Sergeant Hale continued, more resolute now. He told us we were to remind people who keeps this town running. His words, not law enforcement him. I nodded slowly. Did you ever refuse? Yes, twice. And the consequences? I was reassigned to graveyard shifts in low traffic zones. He called it realigning resources. We all knew it was punishment. Punishing officers for not participating in corruption, it's the kind of stupidity that always unravels eventually. The more threads you pull, the messier the pile. Did any other officers express concerns, I asked? Yes, Your Honor. Several. Are any of them here today? She glanced at the row of uniformed officers behind the chief. A few shifted uncomfortably, eyes low. She nodded. Yes. The chief let out a low, humorless laugh. Oh, this is adorable. Turning my own people against me. You think that makes you powerful, Judge? I leaned in elbows on the bench. No, Chief. That's where you misunderstand. I don't need to turn anyone against you. You did that all by yourself. His face darkened. Sergeant Hale continued, we tried to report concerns to Internal Affairs, but the chief has a direct relationship with the investigator assigned. Complaints disappeared. Officers were warned not to push. Warned by whom, I asked. She hesitated. The chief's deputy. And is he here today? She nodded. He's sitting right behind him. I looked at the deputy, a stout man, mid-50s, eyes darting like a squirrel trying to cross a 4-lane highway. Care to speak, deputy? He swallowed. I acted under orders. Let me guess, I said dryly. Pressure. He nodded. You know what pressure actually is? I asked. A deadline. A heavy box. Not intimidating your own officers into silence about corruption. I turned back to Sergeant Hale. Is that all? No, Your Honor, she said. There's one more thing. There always is. She reached into a folder. My bailiff took it and brought it to me. Photos, receipts, logs. All documented neatly, chronologically, with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment long before today. These, she said, are records of officers being dispatched to perform personal errands for the chief, driving his relatives, escorting contractors to his home, guarding private events he hosted. The chief threw his hands up. That's called community engagement. No, I snapped. Community engagement is organizing a charity event, not using officers as your personal Uber. Sergeant Hale inhaled, deeply bracing. And there are payroll irregularities. That made the chief go still. No more interruptions, no smugness, just frozen waiting. Explain, I said. Overtime reported by officers who weren't on duty. Approved by the chief. Funds redirected to projects that don't exist. And a surveillance system installed at his home paid fully by department funds. The prosecutor's head jerked up. We have the accounting sheets. Sergeant Hale nodded. All in that folder. I looked at the chief, and for the first time since he swaggered into my courtroom, he didn't look proud or smug or invincible. He looked cornered. You have anything to say? I asked him. He straightened his shoulders. Yes, none of this matters. Because I'm the one who decides what happens in this town. You think these people will back you. They need me. I blinked at him. Oh, sweetheart. They needed a police chief. What they got was a tyrant. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, given the evidence presented, the state moves for immediate remand into custody pending formal charges. The gallery gasped. The chief shot to his feet. You can't arrest me. I raised my hand. Sit down. He didn't. I looked at the bailiff. He's not sitting. You know what to do. The bailiff moved 2 officers with him, officers who had been silent until now, but clearly waiting for the permission I just handed them. Funny how quickly loyalty shifts when fear evaporates. Don't you touch me, the chief barked. He backed up hands, clenched eyes, darting like he was calculating an exit. There wasn't one. Chief Kessler, I said, voice sharp as a blade, you are in open court defying a judicial order. You are now in contempt. The bailiff reached for him. He shoved the officer's arm away. Bad choice. Add resisting, I said flatly. Another officer stepped forward. The chief swung toward him, not quite a punch, but close enough. Add attempted assault on an officer. The courtroom erupted, gasps, shouts, scrambling feet, but I didn't move. I've seen men fall apart under far less pressure. This wasn't shocking. This was inevitable. 3 officers grabbed him. He thrashed, furious, humiliated, shouting curses that echoed like the dying roar of a king who realizes the throne was never actually his. You can't do this, he bellowed. I leaned forward, voice low and final. Oh, yes, I said I can. And I just did. They cuffed him. The sound of metal closing around his wrists, that was the beginning of a new chapter for this town and the end of the fantasy he'd been living in. He glared at me as they pulled him upright. This isn't over. I smiled thinly. Chief, the moment you walked into my courtroom and told me you run this town, it was already over. They dragged him toward the doors, still shouting. And as they closed behind him, the room exhaled, fear dissolving, relief creeping in. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. There was still one more truth this town needed to hear. When the doors slammed shut behind Chief Kessler, the silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air itself was trying to remember how to exist without intimidation pressing down on it. I looked around the courtroom. People were still on edge, waiting for someone to tell them what came next. That's what happens when a bully has been steering the ship for too long. Everyone forgets the ship actually has a captain. I straightened in my chair. We're not done. You could feel the room stiffen again. I nodded to the prosecutor. We've dealt with the chief. Now we clean up the mess he made. The prosecutor stepped forward. Your Honor, we request temporary administrative oversight of the police department pending state review. I raised an eyebrow. Temporary oversight. After what we just heard, that department doesn't need oversight, it needs detox. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The officers behind the now empty defense table sat rigid, trying not to look guilty by proximity. Sergeant Hale, I said, turning to her, how many officers actively resisted or refused unlawful directives from the chief? She hesitated. A handful, Your Honor. How many followed them without question? Another hesitation, more than I'd like to admit. Good, I said, because honesty is step one. Accountability is step two. And trust me, step two has a long staircase. The chief's deputy shifted in his seat, sweating through his collar. Your Honor, if I may. No, I said flatly. You may not. He shut his mouth. I tapped my pen. Here's how this is going to work. Every officer in this room is going to remain seated until they receive explicit instructions from court security. You will provide statements. You will undergo review. Some of you will keep your jobs. Some of you won't. Whether you wore the badge with integrity or used it like a rented sledgehammer will determine which group you fall into. A few officers looked pale. Guilt does that, sucks the blood right from the face. I looked at the prosecutor again. Prepare a recommendation for departmental restructuring. This town deserves a police force, not a personal militia. She nodded vigorously. Yes, Your Honor. Now came the part people rarely expect from me, the part where I remind them justice isn't just about removing the rot. It's about making sure something healthier grows in its place. I turned back to the gallery. Everyone who testified today, you were afraid. Rightfully so, but you came anyway. That matters. The cafe owner wiped her eyes. The contractor put a protective arm around his son. I ignored the emotional displays. They're fine, but I don't do sentimentality. I deal in truth. You all survived a storm, I said. Not because you're fearless, but because you chose to speak despite fear. That's what courage actually is. Not pounding your chest, not abusing authority, not pretending you're invincible. It's telling the truth when the truth is dangerous. I paused. And you did that today. The room didn't applaud. They knew better. This wasn't a movie, it was a reckoning. Now I continued, there is one more matter. Every head lifted. I pointed toward the evidence folder, Hale's meticulous records. Sergeant, you documented these for how long? 2 years, Your Honor. Why didn't you come forward earlier? She drew in a breath. I did. No one listened. I nodded. That's the real problem, isn't it? The silence around corruption is rarely accidental. It's engineered. But today, that silence broke. And once broken, silence rarely grows back the same. Hale's eyes softened, gratitude mixed with exhaustion. She'd been carrying this weight far too long. I shifted my gaze back to the officers. If any of you have evidence, texts, directives, orders you know weren't legal, you'd be wise to submit them now, rather than wait for investigators to find them themselves. Because they will. The deputy opened his mouth again. I lifted a finger. Don't. You are on very thin ice, and the temperature is rising. He closed it. Good boy. I leaned back. Now, before we adjourn, I want the record to reflect something very clearly. What happened here today was not about taking down a man. It was about restoring balance. Justice is not a hobby. It's not a suggestion. It's not something that gets applied like sunscreen whenever convenient. I let that sink in. Justice, I said, is the standard. And today, this town was reminded that no one, not even a man who thinks a badge makes him a monarch, is above that standard. A few people straightened like they'd finally regained some part of themselves they'd lost under the chief's shadow. The bailiff approached. Your Honor, transport is ready for the chief. I nodded. Good. Make sure he understands the words. You run this town will not be accepted as his phone call. The gallery laughed, short, startled, cathartic. I didn't smile. I meant every word. When the bailiff stepped back, the prosecutor asked, Your Honor, will there be additional hearings? Of course, I said. Corruption isn't a nail you pull out, it's a wall you tear down. We're only halfway through the demolition. I stood, and the entire room rose with me. But instead of leaving, I placed both palms on the bench and spoke clearly, firmly, because what I said next needed to echo long after I walked out. Let today be a reminder. Power is not ownership. Authority is not immunity. And fear, I glanced at the empty chair where the chief had sat, is not leadership. Then I dropped the final line, the kind people remember even if they pretend they don't. In my courtroom, the law runs this town. Not you. Not ever again. I lifted my gavel. Bang. Adjourned. But as I walked toward my chambers, I felt something in the air, a shift. Justice has a scent, a sharpness, a clarity. And today, for the first time in years, this town could finally breathe it. And we weren't done. Not even close. The moment I stepped into my chambers, I didn't even get to sit before my clerk hurried in behind me with eyes wide enough to signal trouble without saying a word. Trouble isn't new to me. In fact, trouble usually walks into my courtroom wearing its Sunday worst and pretending it's misunderstood. But when trouble follows me out of the courtroom, that's when I know we're dealing with a special brand of stupidity. Judge, my clerk whispered, there's someone insisting on speaking with you. Says it's urgent. I sighed. Urgent in courthouse language usually means someone forgot their parking validation. Who? Before she could answer, the door swung open, and in walked the mayor. A man who'd spent the last decade perfecting the art of taking credit for things he didn't do and avoiding blame for things he absolutely did. He straightened his tie and tried to smile. It came out looking like guilt-wearing aftershave. Your Honor, he said, quite a dramatic hearing today. Mayor, I replied, if you're here to congratulate me, save it. If you're here to complain, get in line. If you're here to lie, turn around. I'm fresh out of patience. He blinked rapidly as if he hadn't expected me to fire off 3 rounds before the bell even rang. People underestimate how fast I diagnose nonsense. I just want you to understand, he said, lowering his voice. Chief Kessler has connections. Lovely, I said. Maybe they can send him a cake with a file inside. He ignored that cowards always ignore humor when it cuts too close. He stepped forward, hands clasped. I'm concerned about the impact this could have on the town's reputation. I stared at him. Let me make sure I understand. You're worried that exposing corruption damages the town's reputation, not the corruption itself. He opened his mouth. I held up a hand. Don't answer. You'll only embarrass yourself. His jaw tightened. Judge, this situation could affect my office. Ah, there it was. The truth finally peeked out like a rodent from under a cabinet. Mayor, I said, if your office is affected by holding a corrupt police chief accountable, maybe your office needs to do some self-reflection, preferably with a mirror that doesn't lie. He lowered his voice further. There are people who won't appreciate you digging this deep. And there are people, I replied, who won't appreciate me stopping. He exhaled sharply. Are you threatening to investigate my office? No, I said calmly. But thank you for volunteering that idea. His eyes widened. That's not what I meant. I walked past him and opened the door. You can see yourself out. He hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Men like him aren't afraid of consequences. They're afraid of witnesses. Judge, he said quietly, just tread carefully. I always do, I replied. It's other people who tend to trip. He left. My clerk looked at me. He seemed nervous. He should be, I said. Anyone who defended that chief is going to have a very uncomfortable month. But before I could sit, my phone buzzed. The prosecutor, Judge, she said we have a problem. Of course, justice never arrives alone. She brings paperwork. What now? It's the chief, she said. He's demanding to make a statement, says he has information we don't want the public to hear. I rubbed my temple. Let me guess he wants a deal. Not exactly, she said. He claims he has documents proving corruption beyond what we already uncovered. I paused. Beyond himself? Yes. Well, that was interesting. I exhaled. Fine. Bring him into a recorded interview room. I'll be there in 10 minutes. When I arrived, he was already seated, cuffed, angry, but this time calculating. A cornered man with a new plan. Dangerous but useful. He glared at me. You think you've won? I think I said, sitting across from him, that today wasn't about winning. It was about cleaning. You were the stain. We scrubbed. He leaned forward. You don't understand, Judge. I wasn't acting alone. Oh, I understand perfectly, I replied. Corruption spreads like mold, quiet, thick, and full of excuses. But unlike mold, you can't hide behind drywall forever. He slammed his cuffed fists onto the table. I followed orders. I stared at him. Whose? He hesitated long enough to confirm he wasn't lying, but also long enough to confirm he wasn't ready to be honest. Mayor, I asked. He didn't blink. Deputy Mayor, County Board, someone higher. Still no reaction. I leaned forward. Listen carefully. You are not a king. You're not even a knight. You're a pawn. And pawns are only valuable as long as someone wants to keep them on the board. Judging by how quickly the mayor sprinted out of my chambers, you've already been sacrificed. His nostrils flared. He knew everything. Of course he did, I said. Men who pretend not to know are usually the ones who knew first. He swallowed hard. That ego of his, the one that strutted into my courtroom like it owned every oxygen molecule, it was cracking under the weight of betrayal. Good. Betrayal is a powerful disinfectant. Chief, I said, you have about 30 seconds to stop pouting and start talking because the only thing between you and a very long sentence is how useful you plan to be. He looked down at the table, jaw clenched. Then he whispered, I have files. Plural, I noted. Good. Continue. They're in a lockbox, he said. Names, dates, payouts, deals. Everything. Not just mine. And what do you want? He lifted his eyes. Reduced charges. Protection. I sat back. Protection from whom? He hesitated. Everyone. That told me more than a confession ever could. Give us the code to the box, I said. If the information is as substantial as you claim, the prosecutor will consider negotiating. I want it in writing. You'll get it, I said. After we verify you're not sending us on a scavenger hunt for your bowling trophies. He scowled. I'm telling the truth. Finally, he gave the code. The prosecutor sent officers to retrieve the lockbox. When they returned, they handed her the contents. She opened the folder and paled. Judge, she whispered, this is huge. I flipped through the pages. Not just the mayor, not just the deputy mayor, 3 council members, 2 business owners, a building inspector, even a state liaison. The roots were deeper than anyone expected. I closed the folder. Well, I said dryly, looks like we don't need a broom. We need a bulldozer. The chief looked at me. For the first time all day, he wasn't smug or angry or arrogant. He looked relieved. Judge, he said quietly, I didn't start this. No, I replied, but you certainly enjoyed the ride. He swallowed. I stood. Transfer the chief to protective custody, I instructed, and get the state attorney general's office on the phone. As the officers escorted him out, he glanced back. No crown, no swagger, just a man who finally understood the cost of the lies he built his life on. Back in my chambers, the prosecutor set the lockbox file on my desk. Judge, what now? I exhaled. Slow, controlled, determined. Now, I said, now we clean house. Starting with the mayor. Oh no, I said, grabbing the folder. We start with the truth, and then we let the dominoes fall exactly where they deserve to. When I finally left the courthouse, the sun was setting, soft orange, deceptively peaceful. The town looked quiet. But underneath that quiet, something was shifting. Fear was dissolving. Truth was widening its jaws. And justice, real justice, was finally awake. I walked down the steps, feeling the weight of the day settle into something sharp and steady. This town thought the chief ran it. But today the town remembered who really runs things. Not him. Not the mayor. Not power. Not fear. The law. And as long as I'm in that courtroom, the law will run this town loudly, clearly, relentlessly, whether anyone likes it or not.